Number 1. The island that refused to disappear. 3,000 miles from anywhere that matters, in the far eastern edge of the Solomon Islands, there's a volcanic speck of land smaller than most airports. It's called Tikopia, and for 3,000 years, it has done something almost no other place on Earth has managed to do. It has fed every single person who lives there, without importing a single bag of rice, without a single cargo ship delivery, without a single grain of foreign wheat. While entire nations have collapsed from famine, while empires have crumbled because they couldn't feed their own people, this island the size of a small farm has quietly kept its population alive, generation after generation, using nothing but the ground beneath their feet, and a set of rules so strict they make modern sustainability look like a marketing slogan. Tikopia is 1.5 square miles. You could walk around the entire island in an afternoon, and yet, somewhere between 1,200 and 1,500 people live there right now, packed onto this tiny volcanic crater, growing enough food to feed every mouth, every year, without fail. No famine has wiped them out. No drought has starved them into extinction. They cracked the code that most of the modern world still hasn't figured out: how to live within your means, permanently, without ever running out. Before we get into the strange, brutal, and brilliant systems that make this possible, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now where you are. Drop it in the comments below. If you're the kind of person who dreams about a life that costs almost nothing and depends on almost no one, subscribe now, because this island is about to change how you think about money, food, and what it actually means to be self-sufficient. Number 2. A rock in the ocean nobody was supposed to survive on. Picture the map of the Pacific. Now zoom in past Fiji, past Vanuatu, into the outer edges of the Solomon Islands, where the charts basically give up. Tikopia sits there alone, the last scrap of land before open ocean stretches for hundreds of miles in every direction. It's the remains of an ancient volcano, most of it now collapsed into a lake that sits in the middle of the island like a scar. The land ring around that lake is where everyone lives, farms, and dies. There's no airport. There's no port capable of handling large ships. The only way in or out is by small boat, and even that depends entirely on weather that can turn violent within hours. Cyclones tear through this part of the Pacific with a regularity that would terrify anyone used to modern infrastructure. In 1952, and again in 2002, cyclones flattened nearly every structure and crop on the island. And yet, within a year, the island had recovered, not because aid arrived, because the system was built to survive exactly this kind of disaster. This is the part that should stop you in your tracks. Tikopia has no government safety net, no insurance, no emergency food shipments that arrive reliably. If the crops fail, there is no backup plan flown in from outside. So the entire culture, every custom, every rule, every taboo has been engineered over centuries to prevent that failure from ever happening in the first place. This isn't luck. This is one of the most sophisticated resource management systems humans have ever built, and almost nobody outside a handful of anthropologists has ever heard of it. Consider what this actually means in practice. Somewhere in the world right now, a supply chain analyst is drawing up contingency plans for a single warehouse fire that could disrupt deliveries for weeks. On Tikopia, there has never been a warehouse to catch fire, no truck route to get blocked, no single point of failure that could cascade into a crisis, because the entire system was built from the ground up, assuming that outside help would never come in time. Number 3. The population number that never changes. Here's a fact that sounds impossible until you understand how it works. For hundreds of years, Tikopia's population has hovered around the same number, somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 people. Not because people keep dying young, not because disease keeps sweeping through, because the island itself has a hard ceiling on how many people it can feed, and the culture built an entire social system around never crossing that line. Anthropologist Raymond Firth spent years living on the island in the 1920s and returned decades later to study it again. And what he found stunned him. The Tikopians had developed cultural mechanisms, some gentle, some brutally harsh by outside standards, to keep their numbers in balance with what the land could actually produce. Younger sons were sometimes expected to remain unmarried. Emigration to other islands was encouraged when numbers grew too high. In the harshest years of the past, methods existed to limit births that modern observers find deeply uncomfortable to even discuss. But here's the point that matters for anyone thinking about low-cost, self-sufficient living. The reason Tikopia has never experienced a true famine in recorded history isn't because the land is unusually fertile. It's because the population and the food supply are locked together on purpose. Every single person on that island understands, from childhood, that the island can only support so many mouths, and the entire social structure exists to keep that number from getting out of control. It's the opposite of how most modern economies think, where growth is always the goal. On Tikopia, stability is the goal, and stability means saying no to growth before it becomes a crisis. Compare that to almost any modern housing market, where the answer to too many people and not enough space is simply to build upward, to sprawl outward, to squeeze more units onto a smaller lot. Tikopia never had that option, so instead of building more, they controlled the one variable they could actually control: how many people the land needed to support in the first place. Number 4, the garden that never sleeps. If you walked through a Tikopian settlement expecting neat rows of a single crop, you'd be confused within minutes. There is no such thing as a monoculture field here. Instead, every plot of land is stacked, layer upon layer, with different plants growing at different heights, all at once, all year round. This system is called agroforestry, and Tikopia has been practicing an advanced version of it since long before the term existed in any Western agricultural textbook. At the top layer, tall coconut palms and breadfruit trees provide shade and a canopy. Below that, banana plants and other mid-height crops fill the middle space. Beneath those, taro and yams grow in the shaded, moist soil that the upper layers protect from the harsh, tropical sun. Every inch of usable land does multiple jobs at once. Nothing sits idle. There is no fallow field waiting for the next season, because there is no room for waiting. The island cannot afford unused land, the way a large farm in Iowa can afford to rotate fields and let some sit empty for a year. The genius of this system is that it mimics a natural rainforest almost perfectly. Real rainforests don't grow in rows either. They grow in layers, with each plant supporting the ecosystem around it. Tikopians essentially built an edible rainforest, one that produces food year-round instead of just decoration and shade. When a cyclone flattens the coconut palms, the taro underground often survives because it's protected below the surface. When a drought hits the surface crops, the deep root systems of certain trees keep pulling moisture from far underground. The diversity isn't a nice bonus. It's the entire survival strategy. There's also a rotation of labor built into this system that most outsiders never notice. Different crops mature at different rates, so families are never harvesting everything at once and then facing a long, empty stretch with nothing coming out of the ground. It's not just diversity of species, it's diversity of timing, engineered so carefully that a single bad season for one crop barely registers against everything else still growing. Number 5. The ocean as a second farm. Land alone couldn't feed this many people on this little space, so the Tikopians treat the surrounding reef and lagoon as an extension of their farmland. Fishing here isn't a hobby or a weekend activity. It's a scheduled, regulated, deeply respected part of daily survival, and it comes with its own set of unwritten laws that everyone follows without question. Certain fishing grounds are reserved for certain families. Certain seasons are off limits for certain species, giving fish populations time to recover before they're harvested again. Shellfish gathering along the reef flats is often done by women and children, while deeper lagoon fishing and open ocean canoe trips are handled by men, using canoes built by hand from island timber, following construction techniques passed down without ever being written on paper. The lagoon in the center of the island, the remains of that ancient volcanic crater, also serves as a source of food and a buffer during storms. When cyclones hit, the surrounding reef takes the brunt of the wave energy, protecting the gardens further inland. Nature built the shield. The Tikopians simply learned never to build in a way that would weaken it. This is the part modern coastal cities still haven't learned. Mangroves get cleared, reefs get dredged, and then the first big storm wipes out entire communities that removed their own natural protection to build a beach resort. Tikopia never made that mistake because they never had the option to rebuild after making it twice. Even the tools used for fishing reflect this same philosophy of using exactly what's needed and nothing more. Nets are woven from local fiber, hooks are carved from shell and bone in places where metal is scarce, and canoes are patched and repaired for decades rather than replaced. Number 6. The taboo that saved a civilization. Every culture has rules. Few cultures have rules that are directly, mathematically tied to food supply. The way Tikopias do, there are traditional restrictions on cutting down certain trees, on harvesting certain crops before they're ready, on taking more from the reef than a family actually needs. These aren't suggestions. Breaking them can mean serious social consequences, because everyone on the island understands, at a gut level, that one greedy harvest today could mean an empty stomach for an entire village next season. This is the concept that anthropologists have spent decades trying to explain to modern audiences who grew up in economies built on endless consumption. On Tikopia, taking more than your fair share isn't just rude, it's dangerous to everyone around you, because the island has zero slack in the system. There's no warehouse of surplus grain sitting somewhere waiting to bail out a bad decision. What's growing right now is what everyone will eat for the coming months, and nothing more. Compare that to how most of the world operates today, where waste is baked into the entire food chain, from the farm to the supermarket to the trash can. Tikopia's traditional system treats waste as almost a moral failure, not because of some abstract environmental ideology, but because waste on this island has always meant someone, somewhere, might go hungry. When your entire world is 1.5 square miles, you learn very quickly that every single resource has a limit, and pretending otherwise gets people killed. There's a phrase that shows up again and again when researchers describe this mindset: the idea that every tree, every fish, every root has an owner and a purpose long before it's ever harvested. That single shift in thinking, treating resources as already spoken for rather than free for the taking, might be the single biggest reason the tragedy of the commons that has destroyed fisheries and forests all over the modern world has never taken hold here. Number 7. Houses built from what's already there. Nobody on Tikopia is ordering lumber from a hardware store or waiting on a shipping container full of steel beams. Traditional houses are built almost entirely from materials the island already produces. Coconut palm leaves woven into thatch for roofing, timber cut and shaped from island trees, and rope made from coconut fiber twisted by hand, a material called senet that's been used across the Pacific for construction, canoe building, and tool making for thousands of years. These houses aren't flimsy. They're built to withstand tropical storms that would tear apart a poorly constructed modern structure. The low-profile design keeps them stable in high winds. The natural materials flex instead of shattering. And when a cyclone does eventually destroy a structure, which it eventually will, The materials to rebuild are already growing right outside the door. There's no insurance claim, no waiting for a contractor, no supply chain delay. The forest is the hardware store, and it never closes. This is worth sitting with for a moment if you're someone drawn to the idea of low-cost living. The entire concept of housing cost, in the way we think about it today, mortgage payments, property taxes, material shortages, doesn't really exist here in the same form. The cost of a house on Tikopia is labor and time, not money, because money in the way most of the world uses it barely functions as the backbone of daily survival on this island at all. Building a house here is also a communal event, not a solitary project handled by a contractor and a crew of strangers. Neighbors show up to help raise the frame, weave the thatch, and lash the joints together with Senate rope. And in exchange, the family who benefits owes that same labor back the next time someone else needs a roof rebuilt. Number 8. An economy that barely uses money. Ask someone on Tikopia how much their dinner cost, and you'll get a confused look because dinner didn't cost anything in the way a Western shopper understands cost. It cost labor, planning, and cooperation with neighbors, but very little of it involved currency changing hands. The traditional economy here runs largely on reciprocity. You help plant my garden, I help repair your canoe, your family gets fish from my catch, my family gets yams from your harvest. This isn't some romanticized fantasy of barter economics. It's a deeply practical system that solves a real problem. How do you keep an entire community fed and functioning when there's no bank, no ATM, and no reliable way to import goods on a regular schedule? Money works great when you can always get more of it and always trade it for something useful. Money works terribly on an isolated island, where the boat might not come for months, and the thing you actually need is fresh water or a working fishing net, not a stack of paper currency. Outside influence has crept in over recent decades. Some Tikopians work seasonally on other islands and bring back cash. Some goods are purchased when boats do arrive, but the core of daily survival still runs on the older system. Food security here has never depended on GDP, currency exchange rates, or a stock market ticker. It depends on whether the taro patch is healthy and whether your neighbor still remembers that you helped rebuild their roof after the last storm. There's a strange kind of wealth that shows up on Tikopia that doesn't translate cleanly onto any bank statement. A family that has helped dozens of neighbors over the years effectively has more social credit stored up than a family that hoarded everything for themselves, even if both families technically own the same size garden plot. Reputation becomes a kind of currency here, one that can't be stolen, inflated away, or lost in a bank collapse. Number 9. The chiefs who manage the island like a very serious business. Tikopia is organized around a system of hereditary chiefs, each representing different clans, and these chiefs hold real, practical authority over how resources are managed. This isn't ceremonial. When a chief announces that a particular crop needs time to recover, or that fishing in a certain area needs to pause, people listen, because ignoring that guidance has historically meant real consequences for the whole community. Think of it almost like a board of directors for an extremely small, extremely high-stakes company where the product is human survival and there is no possibility of bankruptcy protection. Decisions about planting cycles, about how land gets divided among families, about how the island responds to a bad storm season, all flow through this chief system. It's not a democracy in the way modern nations understand the term, but it is a functioning system of governance that has kept order and resource stability across an island, with almost no formal law enforcement in the Western sense. What's fascinating is how this system adapts. During and after major disasters, like the cyclones that hit in 1952 and 2002, the chiefs coordinated community-wide responses, reallocating land, adjusting planting schedules, and managing emigration to other islands when the population pressure became too intense for the land to handle. Its governance built entirely around one question: will everyone eat this year? And every decision gets filtered through that lens first. This kind of leadership only works because the chiefs themselves live under the exact same constraints as everyone else. A chief on Tikopia doesn't retreat to a mansion while everyone else tightens their belts during a bad season. That shared risk is probably the single biggest reason the system has held together for centuries without collapsing into corruption. Number 10. The outside world finally showed up, and it almost broke everything. For most of its 3,000-year history, Tikopia's isolation was its greatest protection. Nobody could bring in enough outside disruption to break the system, because almost nobody could get there at all. That began changing in the 20th century, as colonial administrations, missionaries, and eventually researchers started making regular contact. Christianity spread across the island. Some traditional practices faded. Contact with the wider Solomon Islands increased. This is where the story gets complicated, because it would be dishonest to pretend Tikopia exists in some perfectly preserved bubble, untouched by modern influence. Younger generations have left for education and work on other islands. Some traditional customs around population control have shifted as external attitudes and church influence changed local practices. Climate change has made the cyclone seasons less predictable, and rising sea temperatures threaten the reef systems the island depends on for a significant portion of its food supply. And yet, remarkably, the core of the system has held. The agroforestry gardens are still there. The reciprocity economy still functions as the backbone of daily life. The chief system still manages resources. What Tikopia proves, even as outside pressures mount, is that a resource management system built with this much precision doesn't just disappear. The moment modernity knocks on the door, it bends, it adapts. But 3,000 years of built-in discipline doesn't vanish in a single generation of contact with the outside world. There's an interesting tension playing out right now between the pull of easier, cash-based life on larger islands and the pull of a system that has never once let its people starve. Some young Tikopians leave for school and never fully return. Others come back after a few years away, having tasted the instability of a cash economy that can evaporate a paycheck overnight, and choose to rebuild their lives around the older system instead. Number 11. What a low-cost life actually looks like when you strip away every illusion. If you're watching this channel because you're curious about low-cost, sustainable living, Tikopia is maybe the most extreme, real-world example on the planet. There is no rent here, because land is inherited and managed collectively, not bought and sold on an open market. There is no grocery bill, because food comes from your own garden, your family's garden, and the reef your community has fished for generations. There is no electricity bill, because most daily life doesn't run on a power grid at all. There is no debt, because there's no bank offering loans against a future that nobody can guarantee. But it would be a lie to present this as some kind of paradise with no cost at all. The cost here is labor, constant, physical, unrelenting labor every single day. Planting, harvesting, fishing, building, repairing. There's no retirement account funding a life of leisure at 65. There's no calling in sick and having a paycheck still show up. The safety net isn't money sitting in a bank. It's the relationships you've built with your neighbors and the health of the land you've tended your entire life. This is the trade-off that low-cost living always eventually reveals, whether you're talking about a remote Pacific island or a modern homestead in rural America. You can strip away the financial cost of survival almost entirely, but you can't strip away the labor. You just change what currency you're paying in. Tikopia pays in sweat, time, and cooperation instead of dollars, and for 3,000 years, that currency has never run out. Even when the money economy the rest of the world runs on has crashed, inflated, and rebuilt itself more times than anyone can count. Think about what that actually means over a full lifetime. A person born on Tikopia will spend decades doing physical work that never technically ends. No weekends off, in the way a modern office worker understands weekends, no vacation days accruing in some system waiting to be cashed in. But they'll also never face the specific modern terror of a layoff notice, a market crash wiping out a retirement fund, or a landlord raising rent past what a paycheck can cover. Number 12. The lesson that applies far beyond one tiny island. Step back from Tikopia for a moment and look at the bigger picture. Nations far larger, far richer, and far more technologically advanced have experienced famines, financial collapses, and supply chain failures that Tikopia, with none of that wealth or technology, has simply never faced in 3,000 years of continuous habitation. The difference isn't luck, it's design. It's a culture that built limits into every part of daily life, instead of pretending limits don't exist until a crisis forces the issue. Most modern economies are built on the assumption of continuous growth, more people, more consumption, more production, forever. Tikopia was forced, by its sheer physical smallness, to build an economy around the opposite assumption that resources are finite, that population must match what the land can support, and that waste today directly threatens survival tomorrow. It's not a comfortable philosophy for a culture obsessed with expansion, but it's a philosophy that has worked uninterrupted for longer than most nations on Earth have even existed. You don't have to move to a 1.5 square mile volcanic island in the Pacific to take something useful from this. Every principle Tikopia lives by scales down to a backyard garden, a rural homestead, or even a suburban household trying to cut costs and depend less on a fragile supply chain. Grow more than one crop in the same space. Build reciprocity with the people around you instead of relying entirely on money. Understand exactly what your local environment can sustainably provide and stop before you exceed it. Tikopia figured this out 3,000 years ago, with no textbooks, no internet, and no outside help. The question worth asking is why so much of the modern world still hasn't caught up. Number 13. What happens when a family runs into hard times? On Tikopia, there's no unemployment office and no emergency fund sitting in a savings account somewhere. When a family loses a canoe in a storm, or a garden gets flattened by a falling tree, the community response isn't paperwork and applications. It's immediate and physical. Neighbors show up with food from their own stores, labor to rebuild what was lost, and an understanding that this same misfortune could just as easily have landed on their own household next season instead. This isn't charity in the way modern society thinks about charity. It's closer to insurance, except the premium is paid in years of showing up for other people rather than a monthly deduction from a paycheck. Everyone on the island understands that today's giver could easily be tomorrow's receiver, and that mutual vulnerability is exactly what keeps the system honest. Number 14. The children who grow up already knowing how to survive. There's no formal school teaching agricultural science on Tikopia, no textbook explaining crop rotation or sustainable fishing limits. Instead, children learn by doing, following their parents into the gardens from the moment they can walk, learning which plants need shade and which need direct sun, which reef pools are safe to gather from, and which are reserved for another family, simply by watching and repeating what generations before them have already done. By the time a Tikopian child reaches their teenage years, they already carry an intuitive understanding of resource limits that most adults in developed economies never fully grasp, even after decades of working and paying bills. They know, without ever running a spreadsheet, exactly how much their family's plot can produce and exactly what happens if that limit gets pushed too far. Number 15. The quiet economics of doing less. One of the strangest things about studying Tikopia from a modern, low-cost living perspective is realizing how much of the system depends on restraint rather than productivity. Modern economics almost always frames success in terms of maximizing output, more crops per acre, more fish per trip, more efficiency squeezed out of every resource. Tikopia's system, by contrast, has survival built around deliberately not maximizing anything, leaving fish in the reef that could be caught, leaving trees standing that could be cut, leaving population lower than the land could theoretically support if pushed to its absolute limit. This margin, this buffer of unused capacity, is precisely what allows the island to absorb a bad cyclone season or a poor crop year without collapsing. A system running at 100% capacity has no room left when disaster strikes. A system that deliberately runs below its theoretical maximum has exactly the cushion it needs when the ocean or the sky decides to take something away. It's a completely different definition of efficiency than the one most modern economies chase, one where leaving something on the table isn't waste, it's the entire safety net. If this story changed how you think about cost, survival, and what it really means to live within your means, hit like on this video right now. Subscribe if you want more deep dives into the places on Earth that have quietly solved problems the rest of the world is still struggling with. And down in the comments, tell me this: if you had to live the way Tikopia lives, no money, no imports, just what the land and the sea around you could provide, do you think you'd survive the first year? I'll see you in the next one.